Young George Washington, America's first president. George Washington was America's first president. He was born in Virginia in 1732. In those days, America was ruled by the King of Great Britain. Virginia was a British colony. Okay, earlier this year we talked about how America, the colonies, were under the British rule, and they were underneath the rule of the King and the Queen of Great Britain. And a lot of people left because they wanted to have the freedom of choice, the freedom of religion, the freedom of choosing the laws they wanted to follow, the laws that they wanted in their area. But unfortunately, when George Washington took over, we were still under Great Britain's rule. Let's keep reading. Young George didn't care who ruled America. He was too busy playing games and helping his family on their farm. When George was 7, he started school. He went to a one-room schoolhouse. Children of all ages sat together and were taught by one teacher. Can you imagine sitting in a room where you have a kindergartner beside you and maybe an 8th grader and a high schooler behind you? It would be very different, wouldn't it? When George was 11, a very sad thing happened. His father died. George was sent to stay with his older brother, Lawrence. Lawrence lived in a big farm called Mount Vernon. George loved it there. At Mount Vernon, George learned a lot about farming, but there was time for fun too. He hunted, fished, and rode horses. George loved riding horses most of all. When George got older, he joined Virginia's army. He led many attacks against the French and the Indians. George was a good leader. Soon he became the head of Virginia's army. One day, George met Martha Custis. She was a young widow with 2 children. George and Martha fell in love. Soon they were married. George took his new family to live at Mount Vernon. They were very happy there. But life in America was not easy. The British king made the American colonies pay high taxes, and he passed laws the people didn't like. And remember, look at their faces. Look at how they were feeling about these laws. And remember, they moved to America to get away from that. And now it's even worse for them. So you can only imagine how they would feel. You can see right here, this guy, look at his facial reaction. And it's, oh my goodness. So that tells you exactly how they feel, even if you didn't know. George Washington wanted to fight for America's freedom. Many people agreed with him. The colonists went to war against Great Britain. The war was called the American Revolution. Washington was in charge of the whole American army. The army fought hard against the British. Washington's men had little money and supplies, but Washington was a brave leader, and he made his army believe they could win. I want you to take a second and realize that Great Britain's army had shoes and equipment and ammunition and guns, and they had everything they needed to have. But I want you to look at George Washington's army. Look at these guys here. They don't have a uniform to keep them warm. They don't even, look, this guy doesn't even have shoes. He just has bandages on his feet. But they were working, and they were going to fight together for our freedom because George Washington was a great leader, and he was making them believe they could win. He encouraged them and gave them what they needed. Finally, after 8 long years, the war ended. The colonies were free. America was free. After the Revolution, Washington still had important jobs to do. He helped create the Constitution. People set down rules for the new government to follow. So the Constitution is just a great big fancy name for these are the laws that they decided they were going to follow. So a group of men got together and wrote down those laws. So that's called the Constitution. And we still have the Constitution today. Then he was chosen to be the first president of the United States. He was president for 8 years. As you can see, this flag looks different. I wonder why. I want you to think about, because in our discussion, I'm going to ask you about that. Why does our flag look different than what it does today? What's the same? What's different? And why? When his days as president were over, Washington and his wife went home to Mount Vernon. 2 years later, George Washington died there. Across the river from Mount Vernon is Washington, D.C., the nation's capital. It was named in Washington's honor. America has had many presidents, but few are as well loved as George Washington. All right. I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit about George Washington. Don't forget to do your discussion and then move on to the next item.